Welcome to another episode on Web Application Scanning using Qualys WAS. Today, we're going to be looking at configuration settings in Qualys. Configuration settings allow us to configure 7 different settings. We have option profile, which is the configuration settings that your web application can actually use when you want to run your scans. Brute force list has to do with the testing or brute force attack, password attacks against your web application in terms of testing the username and password to see which or the password strength that can break your application. Also, we're going to look at search list. So the search list allows you to search specific QIDs, which is Qualys identifiers. Qualys uses QIDs to identify specific vulnerabilities. So you can define the search list you want. If you're searching for specific vulnerabilities, you can also define that. And then for the parameter set allows you to look for specific parameters, such as which is called which is personal identifiable information. So that information requires credit card information, identity information, and addresses. So these are the different parameters we can actually have. So we're going to create as we can edit the previous one, we can edit the default, or you can create a new parameter set. And then we're also going to look at DNS override. So with DNS override, it allows you to be able to map your URL to a specific IP address. So should in case you have it in a non-production environment and it's on a dedicated IP address, you can just use a DNS override. So it maps that particular URL to a specific IP address. And then we're also going to look at how you can create an appliance. You can leverage appliance to run or to scan web applications. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the global settings. Okay, so looking at the option profile, we're going to create. So the default option profile is the initial WS options, which has been predefined or which is the default settings that you have that you can actually use to scan a web application. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new profile. So the first thing to do in creating the profile is to name your profile. So we're going to call it test profile. Okay, and then you can choose to make this test profile a default for this subscription. So meaning that every web application would use this test profile. And the advantage of doing this is that it's better you have specific profiles for specific type of application. So if you have production-based applications, you can create specific test profiles, and then for non-production environment, you can also create specific test profiles. So what it just means is that whenever you're creating or you're onboarding a new application, you can specifically test profile or the option profile you want to use to test that particular application. So I'm just going to leave this as test, set this as default options profile for this subscription. Next is we're going to be looking at the general settings. So for form submission, default settings here is the post and get. So meaning that when you're submitting, you can submit information and then you can retrieve information. So the first one, post, allows you to input information, post information into your form, and then the get allows you to retrieve information from your form as well. So it's better you have it as post and get. And then the form core scope allows you to be able to gather more information or to be able to ensure that your form is scoped properly. So in checking this, it uses its own form uniqueness calculation to be able to form the core scope. And then for the maximum link to call, the maximum link is 8,000. So you can select between 1,000 to 8,000 URL maximum links you can call. So we're going to leave it at 1,000. And then the user agent requires the type of browser you can use to test the application, or the browser that the application will accept. So depending on the web application you're trying to test, you can just input the information that you have. But most times the default is sufficient enough. But peradventure you have specific user agent you want to use to test your application, then you can have to put in the information in this particular field. And then for the initial parameters, you can see once we created an initial parameter, we can come here and enable that setting as well. But for now, we're just going to use initial parameters. And that initial parameter speaks to credit card information and using names, personal identifiable information, credit card addresses, and those type of information. And then you can also ignore some specific common libraries or file extension. So if you don't want to go, the file extension is Microsoft Word, PDF, and you can also click on the exclamation mark here to view more information. So doc extension, zip, and also PDF as well could be ignored. So if you select this checkbox, it allows you to ignore that. And then the calling options, if you select the enhanced calling, it allows you to be able to increase the coverage of the calling on that particular web application. So it does enhance calling. So it goes deeper into the URLs to be able to identify more URLs. So it goes into the directories within that URL to be able to identify more URL that you can use to test. And then if you enable the smart scan, it allows you to be able to, probably the application was developed with advanced framework like the JavaScript advanced framework or Ajax. You can actually enable smart scan to be able to do that. So on clicking the exclamation mark, it also gives you opportunity to be able to view the more information as regards the specific settings. Okay, so for behavioral settings allow you to, how does the scan response to timeout? So a basic timeout threshold is for 1 minute. This is in seconds, so this is 1 minute 40 seconds. And then if it's an unexpected error threshold, it's for 3 minutes. So you wait for 3 minutes if there's an error before it rescans again. So it uses these two timeout to respond to behavioral settings. If the application it times out, it waits for specific seconds before it continues the scan again. And then in terms of performance settings, there are two types of settings. We have predefined settings and also we have custom. So the predefined settings determines the scan intensity. And it's also recommended that you use low because it doesn't affect the bandwidth, or it doesn't affect the server itself or the application itself, because if you use maximum, for example, it's going to overload the web application you're trying to scan. So it's always best practice to use low when you're running your scans. And then you can define, if you're using custom, you can determine the number of threads. So the thread is more like multiple concurrent sessions or multiple tests you can have at the same time. So the predefined setting is pretty much okay. And then for brute force testing, setting means that you want to try to perform password brute forcing just to check in terms of the password cracking techniques that could be used to break the application or to gain unauthorized access. So you can have a user list. By the time I'm going to show you how you can create yours, but this is the one I created, test brute force. So I created a test brute force list, and then I can initiate it here, or I can use the default. So the default here is specific default settings you can use. There's a minimum, empty password, and user identifiers, limited, standard. So these are more password default password attempts you can actually use, which is pretty fine. But if you have yours, you can also create a user list, which I've done. And then, but let's just use the minimal just to test, or we can use limited with 10 most common passwords that you could use to test. Then let's click on next. Now we're going to be looking at the detection scope. So the detection scope determines what are the types of vulnerabilities that your option profile is going to detect. So the core is just the basic or the most used of vulnerabilities that a web application could have. And then if you want to go for a little more deeper for core cybersecurity types of payloads to identify more vulnerabilities within or test for core cybersecurity vulnerabilities, you can also initiate or checkbox. You can click on this checkbox for you to be able to add those additional payloads to test. And then if you want to view the QIDs, which is Qualys identifiers, or the core vulnerabilities that you're trying to test for, you can click on this core QIDs, and then it shows you all of the vulnerability that it will be testing for, it will be searching for when you're testing for when you're trying to use that core detection scope to detect vulnerability. So these are the types of vulnerabilities that it's going to scan for to see if your web application is vulnerable to these types of vulnerabilities. So let's close that. And then if you select categories, categories gives you an opportunity to choose specific vulnerabilities that you're trying to scan for. So if you want to scan for only, let's say, cross-site scripting, it shows you these are all the QIDs that is associated with cross-site scripting. These are the vulnerabilities associated with them. And then you can close it well. So you can select depending on the specific vulnerabilities you're trying to search for, depending on the type of application that you're trying to test. So if you want to test for authentication and session management, you could just select, and then it shows you all of these severities and vulnerabilities that you can actually test for as well. So for now, I'm just going to go back to the core, but you can also use custom search lists. I'm going to show you how you can create your custom search list as well. If you want to do that, you can also click on it. So I've created a custom search list for cross-site scripting here, which is a dynamic type. But I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to show you how it works. But if by the time once we create those other settings, by the time you're creating your option profile, you can just select them as well. And then if you want to show exclude search lists, you want to exclude specific QIDs, you can also do that as well. And then you can use any of these search lists as well to be able to exclude some of those vulnerabilities you don't want to be included while running your assessment. Okay, so next thing again is you can also look for sensitive content. You can, if you want to search for credit cards, you want to search for social security numbers, depending on the country, and then you can also want to have custom content. So if you want to look for specific word lists within your sensitive information within the URL that you're testing for, you can also include the words in the sensitive content that you want them to have. And then if you also want to search for specific keywords as well within the URLs, you can also do that by selecting and then imputing the values that you want to do. So for now, we're just going to remove all of these settings. And then next is we create, okay, let's go back to core. Let's just select core. So we can also do a XSS power mode. So if you want to select more of advanced cross-site shooting based vulnerability, so you have all the QIDs here as well, and then we can do everything. So everything means that it's going to search for all the vulnerabilities that it's possible it could find, but this would also take more time. So all of this depends on your requirement, the specific vulnerabilities you're looking for. But let's just leave it at core for now. But at least I've been able to show you some of this detection scope, so you can make use of anyone depending on your requirement. And then let's click on next. So we can just put in the comments test profile. So we can, whatever it is, we can name it as whatever it is we want to name it as. And then we click on next. And then we can review our settings, and the option profile has been created. Okay, there's an error. Let me just refresh and see what the problem is. Okay, so I had to pause the video to be able to find out what the error message, why I had that error message. So what to do? The best way to resolve it is to switch to the classic UI session. Take me to the classic, and then from the classic session, classic UI, I should be able to create a test profile. So because I'm using a community edition, you're only permitted to create one profile. So I'm creating, so I had to delete the previous profiles. So I had to create this initial profile again for me to be able to continue with this demonstration. So I'm just going to create a new profile again using the old classic UI session, using the classic UI interface. So I'm going to name it as test profile again, and then let's make it as default. Then we click on continue. So it's the same parameter form submission. We're choosing post and get, and then we're going to include form call scope. I'll explain what form call scope is, and then I'm going to select enhanced calling as well, and then I'm going to change the system list to limited using common passwords. and then I'm going to click on continue. I'm going to select the core. The same thing applies. So if I'm doing categories, we can see that we can select the same setting. So it's just the user interface that's different, but it's the same settings. So I'm clicking on next, continue, and then I'm going to call it test profile. And then I'm going to click on continue, and then I'm going to click on finish. Okay, so you see the test profile has been created, and then we can switch back to the new user interface, and then we should have our profile there as well. Okay, so you see we have a profile. So in case you're having any of those issues in terms of using community edition, creating a test profile, just switch to the classic user interface, and then go ahead and follow these steps for us to be able to do that. So I could select this. If I click on view, we're still going to see the same settings that we configured. Select the same settings, then click on comment, click on action logs, and then we are good to go. Next is let's check the boot first list. So for boot first list, I was able to create a boot first list, and then to create it, just click on new list. Just name the boot first list test list. I'm going to call it test list 2, just to show you how to create a boot first test list, and then you click on next. So there's a default setting or default sample file that you can actually use to do that. So let's just download that just to show you how it looks like. So this is the default. If you're using a CSV format, so this is how the username and password should be arranged. So I have created mine username and password, and there it is, test credentials, and then you have my username and my password already created. So I'm just going to upload this. So to do that, just click on browse, and then you upload test credentials. Click on open. Is it responsible to verify that you have permissions to scan? Yes. And then you see the username and password that will be used for testing has been added. And then click on next. And then it's just I can call it test brute force, test brute force list, or whatever name you want to call it. And then you click on next, and then you're good to go. So create brute force list. Let's give it a second. And there we go. So we've created the second, we've created the test list. So I can also delete the previous one. So this is just to demonstrate how you can actually make use of how you can create a brute force list. And then I'm going to show you how you can test and make use of these settings as well. And then for the search list, I've already created a search list as well. I call it course size scripting, but I can create a new search list. So we could call it, so there are two ways. You can create static, or you could create dynamic. So if you're creating a static list, it means you need to know the QID that you want to make use of. And that might be a little bit daunting if you're not really familiar. So it's better you use dynamic. But let me just show you how the static looks like. So we can call it test search list. Okay, we'll click on next, and then we need to add the QID. So you can add new. You have to include the QID details, or you can also select from a list of QIDs. Just give it a second. So these are all of the QIDs you have. So you can just select any QID, and then you click on add, and then you click on next, and then you can provide a comment for it. But let's not go through that. Let me just walk you through the dynamic. I think the dynamic is actually better. So we do dynamic list, and then we create a test search list again, search list 2. Okay, we click on next, and then you select the criteria. So the criteria allow you to choose what are the criteria you want to select for, especially when you want to add the QID. So it's always better to choose depending on your requirement though, but I would suggest you choose exploitability. You want to find out if the QIDs are exploitable, if they're exploitable tools that could be used to take advantage of those vulnerabilities or QIDs. So you can select core security, immunity, Qualys, just select any of these different exploit databases that you can actually use. I'm just going to choose random, and then I'll click on save. So once I click on test, it will provide me with a list of all of the QIDs that applies to that search list, which is actually better. So you see, it provides us with all of those QIDs you could use, and then you could click on select next. Then we can list it. Test QIDs, and then you click on next, and then we can click on create search list. So we're going to have a lot of QIDs in the search list that we can make use of when we want to run our test. Oh, we're having the same issues. Okay, let me cancel this. Let me delete this as well. Let's see if I delete this. This will give me access to be able to test that. So let me create a new search dynamic list as well. Call it test search list. So you can name it whatever you want to name it. You don't have to use this search list, but I'm just using this for demonstration purpose. And then I can select the criteria as well. I want to choose exploitability. And then I'll select, let's say, Canvas, exploit DB, Metasploit. I'm just going to choose any of just few of these exploit repository that we could use. So let me just save, and then I could do tests just to see all the QIDs as well that it would provide. Okay, so I have all the QIDs here. Okay, so I just copied the QIDs in case I want to use it for something else, and then click on next, and then let's call it test, then click on next, and then let's create a search list. Yes, so we're able to create a search list. So it seems that we can only create one search list because of the community edition that we're making use of. So now let's move to parameter sets. I've already created, so this is the initial parameter set that is in use. Let's create one more parameter set. So let's call it test parameters. And then we can click on next as well. So these are all of the information. So for credit card information, we can use this to search for that. Apparently you can modify this. You can modify the credit card information, but you can't add additional parameter information. So you will have to select or provide whatever information you want to look out for depending on what you're searching for. And then we'll click on next. We can call it test as well, and then create the parameter set. Okay, so we've created the parameter set here, and then let's go click on DNS override. So for DNS override, like I said, DNS override allows you to be able to map your URL or the web application to a specific or a private IP address. So if you have a test environment and the application is not yet live, but it's on the test server or it's still in testing phase, so you can just create a mapping, and then we'll call it test map, for example, and then we click on next. So you can create a URL, let's say testurl.com, and then we can do IP address 127.0.0. This is a loopback IP address just for testing purpose. So depending on your environment, you have to use the actual URL and the IP address. And then we'll click on next, and then we do test as well. We don't even have to use any comment, but it all depends on you though. Then you click on next, and then we click on create DNS override. So we've created a DNS override, and then let's look at appliance. Now, when it comes to appliance, appliance requires that you create a virtual appliance. So this is a virtual appliance. You could have a virtual appliance or a physical appliance. So if you're using a physical appliance, you would then have to create, you would have to use the parameter, you have to use the personalized ID from that physical appliance to be able to work with that. But in this case, we're just going to be using the virtual appliance. So I created this virtual appliance for you to see how it works. But you can create a virtual appliance here. You can only delete, you can create a virtual appliance here. So this virtual appliance is from the vulnerability management scanning subscription. So if I click on vulnerability management, then I navigate to appliances. So it's the same appliance that I have in the vulnerability management subscription that is reflected in the web application subscription as well. So for me to show you how to create that, you can just click on new, then you select virtual scan appliance. So I can only create one appliance actually, but I don't want to delete this because it's going to take a while to do that. But to create it, it's just create a virtual appliance. So if you have a physical virtual appliance, it's just to click and put in the application code. It's always on the label on the physical device, and then you can just you can just input the application, the activation code here, and then you'll be able to activate it. But because I'm using just one virtual appliance, it might take a while for me to be able to install that as well. But let me see what I could do. I might have to delete this virtual appliance to show you how it works. Delete. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new virtual appliance. So you select virtual scanner appliance. So I've already downloaded the image. You can click on download image only, or you can use the start wizard. So if you use the start wizard, it follows through on how to go about it. But let's just do this start wizard, and then you can create, let's call it virtual web or virtual appliance. Let's call it virtual appliance. Okay, so we choose the virtualization platform. Depending on the virtualization platform you make use of. So for me, I'm using the VMware workstation, and then I click on next. Okay, so now it's the virtual appliance is downloading. It's like it takes an hour to do that. So I've already downloaded it already, so I won't have to go through that process anymore. And then the next thing is to add this personalization code. So this personalization code is what allows you to be able to download or make use of the virtual appliance. So I've already created my VMware, so I can use my VMware to do that. Okay, so click on VMware. So I've already created the virtual appliance here, and this is the virtual appliance. So, but let me just go through and create a new virtual appliance. I just select open, and then I select my OVA file, and then I can name it, as virtual appliance click on import, and then we have to wait for the OVA file to be imported. Okay, so this is my new virtual appliance. So just to edit the settings, ensure that you have it as NAT, because it allows you to be able to pick up IP addresses, and then you click on select, okay, and then you can power on your virtual appliance. Let me power off this one since I'm no longer using it. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video now, and then once it's done, I'll proceed. Okay, so the scanner, the installation is complete. So I just click on enter, and then you can set up your network as well. So I'm using I can do it renewed. I'm using DHCP, so I could also just renew the DHCP list, and then I press yes. Just waiting for it to verify setup networks. Okay, so that's done. Press enter. So now it's to input this personalization code. So I need to put in this personalization code. Okay, so now put in the personalization code, which is 301 93 183 94 5327. Okay, So then it starts preparing, and then it will take a while. It needs to download the latest vulnerability signatures and also the software. So I'm going to pause the video again, and once it is done, we're going to proceed. All right, so we are done with configuring the virtual appliance, and then we can click on check activation. Okay, so it's showing the scanner is ready, and then I can refresh the page. There we go. So I can just for me to navigate back to web application scanning, then configurations, I should be able to view my appliance now. Okay, so this is the virtual appliance as well. And then finally, let's look at the global settings. So for the global settings, we can choose the reporting format. So it uses a web archive HTML. We can use PDF, and then you can select any of these downloadable formats. I rather prefer to do PDF as well, and then the default report storage limit is 200 megabytes. You can choose to do security levels, or you can do high, medium, and low. So security levels is quite good, and then automatically delete scans after 6 months, or you can select never delete. So you can choose this format, and then this is the scanning title format for the name of the report that will be generated. And then if you want to add exclusions, you want to add allowed URL list when you're running your scans, you can also include all of those information there. And then you can choose exclude URLs as well, regular expressions, specific IP addresses. You can also post some regular data, post data exclude lists. So the post data exclude list is the data that you can post. So specific list you want to exclude, you can put the information there as well. And then these are also some of the parameters. Regex, if you want to do regex, what type of expression you want to add, then we can reset this. So that's pretty much how we can make use or use the configuration settings. So to apply those configuration settings, let's navigate back to web applications. So this is the web application that I've boarded, and then I can click on edit the settings, and then we can start making use of some of those settings that we created. So let's click on next. Let's click on next as well. So what I want to do, I want to change the option profile. I can select my test profile here, and then follow. I've already created a video on how to onboard your web application, so I just wanted to show you where you can apply these settings. So most of the time, it's always preferable that you create your configuration profile first before you onboard your web application. But since I've already onboarded it, we could also select any of these profiles as well, and then you can click on next. So if you want to run, this is where we can actually include some of these settings we created. So for DNS override, once you select it, you can click on, and then you can select the DNS override that we created. And then also, if you want to add, this is for authentication records, but we're not doing authentication record here. And then we can click on next, and then we can update web application with that information. Okay, so that's done. So let's go back to configurations. Okay, so thank you very much for viewing this long. I'll see you in my next video. Bye for now.